Welcome back, viewers, listeners, those of you who are passionate about all things noir. Dr. Noir today has what she deems a total treat for you. I have an author with me in the consultation room who we don't get to see each other very often, but it's someone who I consider very close for the few times that we've been together. But when there is a meeting of the minds and a meeting of the hearts, then there is something special that time and space cannot change. And so it's an absolute pleasure and a treat to welcome Paul Hardisty in for the consultation. Paul, thank you so much for being here.
My
How are
pleasure.
you?
Great. Yeah, it's great to see you. It's been a while, like you said. Yeah, really glad to be here. Thanks. Thanks, Jackie.
Yeah, are you well, sir? Are you well?
Yeah, I'm feeling good. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent. So, we're going to be discussing this book, The Forcing. Let me read from the back page for you. A cataclysmic clarion call literary climate change thriller by one of the world's leading environmental scientists. I would say to you, if you read no other book in the first half of this year, 2023, please, I would say treat yourself. But it's actually a read that will challenge you in many ways. But we like a challenge and we like to consider so many aspects about life. So, Paul, I want to say thank you yet again that you bring us a literary treat. You write so beautifully, but you also don't let us off the hook as readers, as citizens of this beautiful, treasured planet. And you make us consider so much about our existence and so much about our future. So, again, um, I've got goosebumps because I think it's a book that is definitely of our time and it asks us so many questions. But I have questions for you around this book, and let's see if we can continue to whet readers' appetites or listeners' appetites, because I must say, as many of you know, I've started to enjoy a story by the audiobook, and your narrator, he has such a beautiful voice. And he, as much as your writing on the page transports, your narrator, takes us to that time and place in a not too distant, sadly dystopian future. Anyway, first of all, Paul, tell me, as one of those world leading scientists, what does fiction writing and thriller fiction writing, what does it mean for you?
Thanks, Jackie. Well, first, let me just say I don't think I'm probably one of the world's leading scientists. We as a group, as a cohort,
Uh-huh.
that's a pretty contested space. But I have been doing it for a long time, and I have worked with a lot of incredible scientists, some of the best in the world, over decades in many, many different countries. And, science is one of those areas where we work together, we collaborate. The shoulders of giants really applies there, right?
Yes, yeah.
You look at the progress of humanity over eons, and it's one small step at a time. Each person, each scientist, each engineer contributing their little bit during their lifetime, and then we build on it, and hopefully we move forward. We certainly know a lot more than we
Yes.
ever have.
Yeah.
The technology that we have is certainly more sophisticated, and we are starting to just scratch the surface of the mysteries and the wonders of nature and the universe. So that's perhaps a little hyperbolic. I'm actually pretty humble, hopefully, about my place in that scientific world. I do my bit,
Uh-huh.
but yeah, it's been a great career.
Thank you for all the work that you have done and that you are doing. But being a fiction writer, how do you
Yeah.
marry those two aspects of your life?
Well, it's interesting because right now, as we speak, I'm coming towards, the end perhaps of full-time science career because the writing is now calling me
Oh,
to a degree that I can't ignore it anymore. And about 6 years ago, 7 years ago, I quit to write full time and produce the Turbulent Wake during that
yes.
time,
Yeah.
my last novel, and and it was going really well, and I was just loving it. And then this current, the current thing I'm doing came up, and it was something that I really felt that I had to go and do. So it's always been a struggle balancing the two things and trying. In some cases, there's a thought that one has to keep different sides of your life separate. There's a lot of concern nowadays about those kinds of issues, and I guess increasingly now I'm being pulled in that other direction, because for me, like, I've always wanted to write, Jackie. I think I've told you that
Yeah.
in one of the
Yeah.
times we've met.
I, I,
I
I
think
and I think it's
at,
evident on the page. It's
yeah,
evident.
at
Yeah.
18
Yeah.
I quit university to write, but I realized pretty quickly that it was a disaster, because I could put words on the page, Jackie, but I had no experience and I had nothing to say. So I decided to use engineering and science to
Yeah.
get out there in the real world and learn, so I had something to say.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, yeah, science and all of the things that I've done in my career are what I write about. Write what you know and what
Yes.
you care about.
Yeah.
And
But
I've worked in environmental science for most of my career. So that's what I care about.
and what I really appreciate in your writing is many of us, science is something that might seem a little daunting, or how could we possibly, our brains don't seem to function in that way. But the way you talk about things, you make it so accessible, and removing maybe, the barriers, the mysteries, and when we get to talk about perhaps, well, the main protagonist, the narrator, and he, how he talks about things, then I wonder if there's an element of you in this protagonist simply thinking again about the way you write, and the way you draw in people who might not normally be drawn by those aspects. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, when you look at where we are on the planet right now, and you talk to scientists who've been working for decades on things like climate change and like loss of biodiversity, so many of them will feel as if over the decades we've failed to communicate enough or clearly enough to the broad base of people, right? To most
Mm,
average people,
mm,
to the
yeah.
person on the street,
Yeah.
to the degree that they get it and that they want to force change.
Yeah.
Like, what haven't we said? Why haven't we done it? And so communicating science in a way that the average person you can understand
Yeah.
and get it
Yeah.
is the major challenge that we have as scientists. And I take that really, really seriously. What's the point of having science and doing all this great stuff if people don't really
Yeah.
understand what it means for
Yeah.
us?
Yeah.
And
There's
so
that
I'm
disconnect.
actually
Yeah.
really, really glad that you asked me that question.
Yeah. And I think as well, and we've said this over many years now about crime fiction, thriller writing, mystery writing, that that multiple genre that reaches many people. It is an accessible. People pick these books up, and you know, as much as an academic paper, you know, can posit ideas. Perhaps that notion of reaching a wider audience and making a change is actually through fiction, by getting
Yeah.
people to think, because I think there's that other message, sadly, and again, I'm always amazed at how different things come together. And so it's speaking in my life about the notion of growth, And why do we have to keep growing? Why do we have to keep expanding? What is that all about? And I did a little bit of a challenging moment at work the other day looking at research. Well, it wasn't me, it was my colleague who mentioned about growth. What do we mean by that? And should we be going that way? And again, in the book, asking us those questions.
Yeah. I think somewhere in the book, I managed to sneak in one of my favorite sayings, or maybe it was a question, but it was, I always thought that the economy existed to serve people, but it seems when you watch the news and listen to people that we serve the economy.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And so in that respect, we have it backwards. Certainly if
Without
you
a doubt.
listen to many of our leaders, oh my God, we have to get out there and support the economy. Well, hold on a second. Wasn't it the other way around? Anyway, so I think there's definitely, aspects of that. But the other thing about fiction to me, Jackie, is, and I think I've said this when we met last. To me, the academic papers that you and I both have written, in our academic careers, they present facts and data and experimental analysis, etc. But I think that, and that fact is interesting, but I think
Mm-hmm.
truth only comes through the lived experience, or the shared experience of people through stories. I think that's how people feel truth. They have to live it, or the beauty of fiction is
Yeah.
the alternative, that you don't have to actually live it, but you can get right inside a character, right inside a moment, like
Yeah.
no other medium, not even like film. Because
Yes.
in film, it's two-dimensional and it's given you.
And
But
yeah.
when you read, you have to put yourself into the book.
Yeah.
You are in it,
Yeah.
and you
And
are
yeah.
providing a heap of experience and emotion, and your unique personality is going into the book as you read it, and so it becomes a lived experience. I think that's why people will never stop reading fiction,
De-
ever,
de-
and
definitely.
telling stories.
Stories. Yeah. Going back to those roots of the way we communicate. Because I've said it before on here on the channel, and I really believe it, that there are stories that are waiting to be told. They bubble up, and the question is, who is the conduit for
Yeah,
that story? you
and this
know
is one of them, the forcing. I actually wrote the whole idea for this book out on a small island, on the very, very rugged, very remote coast of Western Australia, in a place that pretty much was modeled as one of the areas where the book unfolds, not to give anything away.
yeah.
I wrote it all out one morning after going for a long swim in the very cold ocean down there. I came out, it was all in my head. I wrote it all down. That was 11 and a half years ago.
Oh,
And
wow.
and then I wrote a first draft not too long after that, but it was pretty bleak. And some of the people that I gave it to said, not too dark. Nobody wants to read this stuff right now. Climate dystopia, nah. And it was too bleak. And it took me 8 rewrites, Jackie. And the last one was during COVID lockdown. I
Uh-huh.
finally got it. I finally got the breakthrough that I needed, which was the interweaving thread, the second story that weaves through the book,
Yes.
that provided hope and light as a counterpoint to, pretty tough going,
Yeah.
in terms of, you're Dr. Noir, pretty noir, pretty dark, pretty black.
It really is, and I think, compared to, for example, um a police procedural, which can have, some very unpleasant individuals within the pages. There we find the noirness, but here that sense of the fate of humanity. I mean, this is noir on the large scale.
Yeah, ultimate noir. That's what I call
Yeah, yeah,
it.
yeah, because this isn't a village, a town, a city, you know, this is the globe, and the future of humanity on, that spinning sphere.
But hopefully in a tractable way. In other words, it's through the eyes of a very small group of 7 people, basically
Yeah,
a small group of people
yeah,
who are, thrust into this crazy, scary, noir, black, dark place, and they have to try to find their way towards the light.
yeah, yeah. Some light, some light still there, the light not
Yep.
extinguished. Well, let's start then with the title, The Forcing. What is the forcing?
Well, it took a long time to get the title right, as often I think, a lot of writers say the same thing. But when it came, it seemed really, really obvious. It works on a number of different levels, right? There's a lot of forcing going on in the book, one way or the other. The technical term
Yes, yeah,
ostensibly is radiative forcing. So it's simply the increase in heat being trapped as a result of greenhouse gas accumulation in the atmosphere as measured in watts per square meter. And the fact that that drives increasing temperature
yeah,
globally.
yeah,
And so it's a technical term. There's actually a bit at the beginning of the book. I don't know if you got the current new version, but at the beginning of the book, there's a bit of an explanation of what it means. But of course, throughout the book, there are a whole other range at many levels of systems being forced. So you've got the climate system being forced. You've got other human systems being forced to go in a particular way. You have individuals
yeah,
forced against their will in a collective, I guess, right? Groups of people.
yeah,
And then you have individuals being forced to do things that are pretty terrible.
yeah, yeah,
And I guess that's what happens, right? One forcing leads to the other, and so on down the chain. That is that's the uncontrolled um, force that's unleashed,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
You see what I mean? So the
yeah,
global forcing of our climate system
yeah.
cascades
Goes
down
down. Yeah,
through all of these systems at different scales, right down to the individual person and what's going on in their lives and the things that they have to face.
yeah. And
So the whole
and
system is forced.
and it made me think as well about, like, choices, and coming to a point where, in a sense, there are no choices, or the choices that are there, are undesirable, and yet choices have, you know,
You have to make them, right?
yeah,
But there are always choices. And I guess, that's part of, this is first and foremost a story. It's hopefully a thriller, it's a
yeah,
bit of, hopefully it keeps you, on the edge of your seat and the pages keep flipping over and, hopefully you get to the end of a short chapter and you go, oh, I'll just read one little bit more.
yeah, yeah,
However, yeah, I mean, there is the underlying motive of trying to get to people to think about some of this stuff, perhaps in a way that they haven't quite before,
mm,
because, the thing about working in science and being really, really close to the leading edge of what we know and understand is that you know a bit more than what the average person knows about where we're going. And I can tell you it's scary.
yeah,
Most scientists and engineers don't want to come across as being catastrophists,
yeah,
you know,
yeah,
but it's we can still change it, which is the good news, right?
yeah,
So hopefully, people read this and go, hey, we got to get our act together. And if we
yeah,
do, things can get a lot better.
yeah, yeah. And I think that's again, the idea of what is possible, what we can do, how we can be together. And people talk about messages of fear, um, but it's also, I think, those messages of, okay, this, this can become reality. This isn't fear mongering. This is what
No.
could happen. So, but then what we can do, and how, I think again, is how can we be together?
Yeah.
You
But
know,
that's the power of fiction, right? That's why we
yeah,
love fiction, because you can imagine different kinds of worlds, right? And
yeah,
people have been imagining various futures, good and bad and medium and indifferent for a long, long time. I think, I wouldn't, this isn't a post-apocalyptic type novel. It's set in the very near future. In fact, when the novel's starting, things are not great, but you can see that people are pretty much trying to still live normal lives. They're getting
yeah,
up, going to work, having coffee, you know, in the case of Teacher, David Ashworth, marking exam papers.
yeah,
His wife's an artist. She's out selling paintings, doing what we normally do, trying to hold on to those last vestiges of,
yeah,
what we might call a normality. But it's getting harder and harder to do so, right? As things start to change
yeah,
more and more quickly.
yeah,
And so,
yeah,
sort of, that's the premise of the book, right?
yeah, yeah. Those
It's not
changes.
some super distant, it's
Yeah,
pretty close.
yeah, yeah. It is. Now, my next question
Yeah.
is, you set the tale initially, you set the tale in North Africa. It's
North
the
America.
North, sorry, I don't know why I said North Africa. North America, forgive me. It's because I've got NA written on my question here. So, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Africa is mentioned, of course, but
Yeah.
set in North America and the
Yeah.
fusion of the United States and Canada. They've
Yeah.
yeah, they're in this pact. And I wondered, as someone in Australia, why you chose that North American setting.
Well, and you can hear from my accent. I'm sure the listeners can tell by now that I'm not Australian. I've lived here for quite a while now, but Canadian originally.
Yeah,
And I still own a house in Calgary, which is where the action sort of starts, right?
yeah,
That's where the Teacher, the main character, I guess, and his wife May, that's where they're living when this all starts, right? He's a teacher, he gets up, he goes to work, he talks to some of his students, and then things start happening.
yeah,
And so, I know that part of the world, and it's a part of the world where, um, you've got that big, powerful southern neighbor. And so there's that whole geopolitical element of, well, what
yeah,
happens to smaller, weaker countries, people? They need the protection of a bigger brother when the world gets crazy, when the world
yeah,
starts to destabilize. So it works on that level, I guess. And when I was young, and I wrote about this in my last novel, Turbulent Wake, which is pretty autobiographical, actually. I roughnecked in Texas when I was young, so I know that small town,
yeah,
dusty
yeah,
part of Texas. And in fact, again, write what you know. I set that town where they're sent, in a place where I was working
yeah,
and living, as a young lad, in working on the rigs, very manual labor, very hot and dusty, and it just fit, because you can just get on a bus, and if you drive long enough, you can get there. And so that transition between, as you move south, and we can already see this, right? We can already
yes,
see
yeah,
in the Hadley cycles, you can already see that we're getting, changes in rainfall patterns, which are meaning some parts of the world closer to the equator, sort of mid latitude, are starting to dry out. The extreme northern and extreme southern polar latitudes are starting to heat up faster than anywhere else, particularly the Arctic. And so those changes in dynamic, I can bring into the book. So I can take the scientific knowledge of what's happening globally, and try to just imprint it so it's realistic. It's a realistic possible future, that has been modeled, actually, by a number of different places around the world, a number of different institutions.
yeah,
So I'm not just sort of making up, a future world out of my imagination. I'm actually just looking at the consequences of some of the models for certain climate trajectories. What do
mm,
they say? Well, that's what they say it'll look like. Okay, fine, I'll write it.
all right.
I'll imagine that.
But in what you're saying, and I love the fact now of thinking, okay, so traveling in the book, the different places, traveling to places that were important for you in your life, and knowing that, okay, so, this is not some random choice. This is because, Paul had part of life there. And I find that really exciting, that when an author takes you to locations, not fictional, but knowing that those locations have had, have played a part in their lives.
Yeah, so
And
yeah, all my books are like that. So, my first novel about physics of dying,
yeah,
shortlisted for the Creasy Prize. That was set in Yemen. And it was based on pretty much real experiences that had a profound effect on me. So much so that it took me a decade to work it through my system to the point where I could write about it. And yeah, I mean, I've just all my books are like that. I think I have a I guess I really connect to places. It means a lot to me. The natural world, I love hiking and sailing and
mhm.
being outdoors, camping, and so that really gets into me, and I just have this need, I guess, to push it back out in the books and make people be able to visit those places, um,
which
through the reading.
which you do. Yesterday I was in conversation with another author about writing nature. Um, and again, your love of those spaces and places and your experiences there, really come out onto the page. But I wanted to ask you about sailing, because sailing is a motif, and the boat, the being on the boat,
Yeah.
it runs beautifully throughout the novel. And I just wondered about Paul Hardisty, the sailor. Yeah, your experiences out on the water. Talk to us about who you are when you find yourself out on the water.
So I don't sail. I'm not a racer. A lot of people
Yeah,
get into sailing to race and so on. For me, a sailboat is a means of exploring the world, and through that, exploring life and the universe and myself and my place in the universe. And you usually with somebody you love, if you're sailing
yes,
well, you can sail by yourself, and I do, but a lot of the time I'm sailing with somebody or a group of people that I'm really close to. and
yes,
and so that feeling of I guess self-dependence, you're out there, um you're challenging the elements, you're challenging the sea, but also, there's huge humility that comes from sitting there in this tiny little thing
yeah,
in the middle of this huge ocean, and you look up and you see the stars, and you just realize, right, I'm on this little tiny planet, on this little tiny boat in this huge universe, in this huge ocean. In this moment of time, I've got infinity behind me and eternity ahead of me, and I have now. And there's just
yeah,
something about, yeah, being out on the water and sailing and traveling and being able to find new places and try to grasp at the ungraspable, right? Like, what is it all about?
yeah,
I know that sounds a bit hokey, but it is really cool. Like, I just really enjoy it. I love the physical challenge. I love the navigational challenge. I love the changes in weather, and it's often scary. And
yeah,
there's something about being scared that keeps me alive.
yeah, yeah. That challenge that's there. I think one of the aspects of sailing, that I appreciated, in the novel is, so we've mentioned him, the main protagonist, David Ashworth, teacher, is that relationship that he has with his sons with regard to the sailing, that how, you know they as young boys, you know with their father on the boat, that generational sharing. Because of course the book does, the one of the, the way that the book is focused is the difference between the generations.
Yeah, and in a way, that's what the whole book is about, right? Because the other key premise of the book is essentially that after, years and years of procrastination and inaction and obfuscation, frustrated at watching things go from bad to worse, a government of youth takes over in North America, right? Young people decide, hey, you know what? We're taking over because it's our future that's at
Yeah,
stake here.
yeah.
And we just don't have any faith that, well, you haven't done anything about it so far. And, everything's getting worse. So they take over. And unfortunately, it's like with any takeover, you've got a situation where sometimes the initial motives get obscured and they turn dark. And so, yeah, institutionalized ageism comes to play. And that's really what sets the whole thing in motion, right? We're blaming you. We're blaming old people for the way things are.
Yeah.
And so we're going to take the retribution that we think is appropriate. And I'm not going to give it away, right? But
Yeah.
that's what launches the action in the book. But then on the other hand, of course, if you want to have hope in the future, then that's the ultimate symbol of hope in the future, is that you have children and you bring them into a world and you hopefully help them have a good life and find happiness and love and treasure those moments that they have, because that's all you got, right?
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of I reflect deeply about those things on a regular basis, and some of that finds its way through Teacher onto the page, because he's really struggling with those kinds of existential questions.
Yeah, yeah. And having been just before lockdown, 2019, at an academic conference, I was challenged by a number of younger attendees. It's your generation's fault that we are in the state
Yeah,
that we're in. So
totally.
yeah. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because thinking, okay, so when we were of a certain age, growing up, did we deliberately, did we purposefully and deliberately bring about the state of the earth as it is now? Or is it that when the messages began to emerge, that we did not heed? So it's more about the things that we didn't do that we could have done, rather than than the things we did.
Yeah, absolutely, right? So I don't know the answers, but what I try to do in the book is ask that question, but on a
Yeah,
number of different levels,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
So we've got the government of youth taking over, and they're blaming you know this group of older people, but the heroes are the older people who are being blamed. One of them, Teach,
yeah,
accepts that he tried probably harder than anybody in his own small way
yeah,
through educating kids and going to rallies and stuff like that, but he recognizes that what he did was completely insufficient. So he feels guilty and he accepts that he has to pay the price. Others around him don't at all. And in fact, one of the people who's part of his group arguably is to blame. But as things go from bad to worse and you see what's actually happening to this group, you start to flip it around and go, hold on a second. Is this fair? Is this justice? I don't, right? So the whole point
yeah,
is it turns it, you flip it, it flips around back and forth. Well, who's
yeah,
right? Who's wrong?
yeah,
Who is to blame?
yeah.
Who really is to blame? And is blame even a concept that we can use now?
Yes, yeah, yeah. And beautiful. And again, in this group, this small group that find themselves together in adversity, it's such a delight to watch the dynamic and try and position yourself. Which type would you be in this group? And again, coming back to Teach, to David Ashworth, who I think he will remain with me long, after finishing the book, because his approach, you know, not the notion of acquiescing, but the notion of recognition, as you say, and that rather than fight this, and sadly we see somebody early on in the book who tries to take a stand, and it doesn't end well for them, but trying to work within the system that is there, and what can one do, that there is that, okay, this would appear to be my fate, and I will work with what we have, or the couple who have been out in Africa, and the skills that they have, that they've learned from being in a situation, and they bring that to the group dynamic. There's a beautiful moment of sharing a small tomato harvest. The things that we take so for granted.
Nothing like a good tomato though, right? When it really
Yeah,
tastes good,
exactly.
especially when you're hungry.
Yeah, but having the knowledge to be able to do these things. What are people's priorities? I think that's what we see in the group. What are people's priorities in a given difficult situation? For one person, it's being able to wash their hair and use up the water supply. You know,
So really, really small scale stuff, right? So
yeah, yeah,
again, I've always been fascinated by this idea of fractal mathematics, fractal geometry, which just means, it sounds fancy, but all it means is that things look really similar, but at very different scales. So you can be in an airplane and you can be looking down at a landscape and you see a river, right? With all its branching, branching tributaries
yeah,
coming together. But then you could be looking at a leaf and you have the same branching patterns.
yeah,
And so I
yeah,
love this idea of recurring patterns at different scales. And so that really small scale stuff about the tomato and individuals and how they get along is just reshaped
yeah,
at a larger and larger and larger
yeah,
scale. And maybe that's the only way I think that's the only way I can figure things out, or try to start figuring some of this things out, because it's a pretty crazy world, right?
yeah. Oh yeah, oh yeah. Um,
I
Thinking a
guess
little
one
bit.
other thing though is just
Oh yeah,
you're talking about teacher and he accepts this, but there's a point, right, where all of a sudden he realizes, whoa, like this isn't what we signed up, what we thought it was going to be.
yeah, yeah,
And he has to make a change. He has to find something in himself that he didn't think he had
yeah,
to protect the people that he cares about,
yeah,
and himself, I guess, too.
yeah, yeah. And so it's almost like, where is that tipping point?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
What are we willing to accept? And then, okay, no more. That's, yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
As individuals, as a small group, as a community,
See,
as a
yeah,
country,
yeah,
as a world.
yeah, yeah,
What are we, where's the tipping point, and what are we willing to accept, and when do we finally feel that we have to act?
yeah. Whew. Big questions, Paul. But I love that you bring us those big questions. Just to
But again,
talk.
hopefully it's just a really good story, right?
Oh
And
yes.
all of this
Oh,
other
it's
stuff
cracking.
we're talking about is
It's
just stuff that
Yeah,
sort of seeps out through
yeah.
the
It is a
through the
cracking read.
cracks.
It really is. I mean, watching, in particular, this man's quest. I mean, it is a quest in the end, I
Yeah.
think, and how that plays out. But just to think about some details of the book, you start with a quote from Genesis, from the Bible, and you end with a quote from the Quran. And I just wondered, your choice of those two holy books, um, why those?
Oh, look, I'm not a religious person in the formal
Hmm.
sense, but
Yeah,
I've worked, all over the Middle East for a long, long time.
yeah,
And so I've read the Quran a couple of times in English, not in
yeah.
Arabic.
Uh-huh.
My Arabic's not nearly good enough. I can order tea and have a conversation and tell a joke, but that's about it. Uh, but it's a fascinating read. Um, of course, the Bible is still, fundamental to much of our our heritage as a society. And the meanings of both of those books, are about wisdom and how to conduct oneself, right or wrong, whether you agree with them or not. What they're trying to do in both those holy books is they're trying to provide some sort of blueprint for human beings, these crazy, infinitely complex people that we each are, to get along and somehow, make a happy life for ourselves and for our families. And so there's a lot of deep wisdom in there. And I don't know that, there's when times go bad, people do reach out to religion. They still do, right? If you're in a war zone, you'll see it, right? People start, I've been talking to people recently. They start going back to religion that they thought they'd lost from their childhood, and they start reading the Bible and they start praying, and it's because people need something to attach to that they think has or had meaning. And so throughout the book, there's various sequences where they meet people who are sort of trying to use, in one case, the book of Revelations, the last book of the Bible, to sort of justify some really, really crazy visions of how the world would go. So I guess it's a little bit of commentary there on some of the fundamentalist side of things. But if you look at the two quotes, the one that starts the book and one that ends the book, one's pretty dark and the other one's pretty hopeful.
Yes. Yeah.
One from the Bible is very dark.
Yeah.
The last one from the Quran is very hopeful. And so I felt it was just the right way to begin and end.
Yeah. I very much appreciated that. It's all right, I didn't see that coming, but yeah, how beautiful to finish on that note. Yeah. You, the writer, and the writing process, and again the format, the structure of the novel, there's very clearly a process of writing going on, a recounting, a bearing witness, or a remembering the importance of memory. And I just wanted to, I mean, I do love it because those sections are in italics, and I always love it when that happens in a book, because you pause from all that's happening and you get a chance to contemplate, and you're taken into something that really just, it holds you elsewhere, I think. And for you, for bringing that into the novel, what did it mean to you to have this structure?
Well, like I said, I think adding that second thread through the novel, the parts in the chapters, the short chapters in italics that are spread throughout the book, that tell the story of the story, I guess. Or, there's, to me, that was the thread of hope that, I needed to put into the novel, I think, to make it whole and to make it work. Like I said, 11 years, I could never make it work. Part of what I was really worried about is it's such an important and such a serious, I guess, topic, that I had to felt like I was doing it justice. I didn't want to trivialize it, or just turn it into a thriller for commercial purposes. I didn't want it to just be a backdrop, but of course I don't want to ram anything down anyone's throat. So this idea of, well, I'm sitting here and I'm writing, so why not have this, writing is reflective, why not have that as the counterpoint thread? And so it describes a process of a very, very difficult journey in the opposite sense. So there's two journeys that are moving in opposite directions in the book. Right? One's in the traditional arrow of time, the thriller part, and the reflective piece is going in the other direction. And you'll notice perhaps towards the end where the tenses start to
Yeah.
merge.
Yeah.
So the language starts to merge, the verb, the tense composition starts to merge to sort of symbolize that, okay, that's fine. I've the remembering of this really difficult journey. It was difficult to do it in the first time in the one direction. It was even harder to do the journey in the other direction.
Wow.
But then they meet and they resolve.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful.
That was
Absolutely.
what I tried to
Absolutely.
do. I don't
Yeah.
know if it worked or not, but
Yes.
that was the attempt.
It certainly does. It certainly does. Now, I am aware of time, and again, really grateful for you spending time with us, and given our time difference as well, Paul. It's so lovely to be able to be. So I have two questions left, and they may seem a little trivial, but hopefully not in comparison, to what we find in the book. But towards the end, there's a mention of a cesium-133 atomic clock. And for those of us who, this is not our world, what is one of those and what does it do?
Well, atomic clocks are just a way of telling time super accurately.
Okay.
And I think in the book it talks about how accurate it is. If you have it in front of you, you could read out. I can't remember the exact numbers, but it's incredible level of accuracy that
Yeah, it
other
says
types of systems don't have.
it says that this type of atomic clock keeps time faithfully to 1 second every 138 million years.
Years, yeah. And so all it does is it's how a crystal, and quartz works the same way, but far less accurate. But how a crystal of cesium-138, I think it is in this context, vibrates to the input of a certain voltage of electricity, and it's highly replicable. Right? It does it exactly the same way every time with almost that much deviation that you described, right? So super accurate. So it's just, I mean, all it is a way of keeping time really accurately, right? But
Yeah.
the reason I put it in the book is because I don't think that that's what time means to people.
Yeah.
And so I
Yeah.
try to explore a different definition
Yeah.
of what time actually is. Like, so have you ever thought about that? What is a unit of time with which one can savor the present? Because if it's only a second, then it's already gone. Like what we just said is already the past.
Yeah.
Future hasn't happened yet. But it feels like we're still in the present, right? We've had this conversation over 35, 40 minutes. It's still the present, isn't it? Maybe. Science would dictate, no, it's gone. Forward motion of time, or forward motion of events equals time. But what is a unit of time that you could say, okay, that's a human sort of present. I can feel it, I can savor it. It has a beginning and an end. And I've thought a lot about it, and in the book I suggest what it is.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not a second.
No.
And it's not a 35-minute, podcast
Surely
discussion.
not. I know. Yeah, I know. Paul,
But great question, thank you.
no, a pleasure. Thank you. Because I love learning. I think it's so important. And then you bring so much more by talking about your choices, and that's lovely. So my last question, of course, in the book there are various places and spaces that that our group and that teach, because I say I feel like I've been on his journey. He finds himself in, and I wondered, for you, the author, if there was one space on earth, and I don't want it to be like a forcing, like you have to go there, but you know one place that if you could save it from from the ravages of time, what would it
And
be?
be there.
And be there,
And be
yeah,
and be
and
there.
be
Yeah, yeah.
there and experience that
And
space, yeah,
savor,
yeah,
savor it. Yeah.
yeah,
So It's pretty much the place that is modeled in the book
Uh-huh.
as the setting for the counterpoint narrative,
Yeah.
the flow back. And it's not too far from where I am here in Western Australia. It's in a very, very remote, beautiful, windswept, surf pounded coastline with these gorgeous billion and 1.1, 1.2 billion year old rocks that provide a magnetism to the little valleys, the little river valleys, and the um, and the beautiful trees and the incredible wildlife. And I, whenever I'm there, you know, camping under the stars, I just feel this timeless, deep connection to to that place. And yeah, I don't got a little piece of land down there, and you know, right on the river. 45-minute kayak from the river mouth leads to the ocean, and it's just really quiet and rainy and cool in the winters, and hot and summer and beautifully Australian summerish in this in the warm season. And it's just really special. And it's I try to pay a humble homage to it in the book.
Yeah. 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 Paul, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts about your writing, about the book, about places. Again, viewers, listeners, The Forcing, it's out now. It's published by our wonderful friends at Arend Books. Highly recommended. I know I say this about authors that come on, but seriously, please, as I say, if you do nothing this first half of 2023, get yourself this book and read this. Okay.
Thanks,
Paul,
Jackie.
a
So appreciate
pleasure,
it. Great to
a
see you.
pleasure, a pleasure. I hope that we can soon be in the same time and space
Yeah.
and continue our conversations. But for now, I wish you all the very best. I give you, thanks again for your writing, and thank you for a friendship that exists in a space that's very special. Thank you.
Thanks, Jackie. Thanks for having me. Take care, everyone.
Pleasure. Bye for
Good night.
now. Bye, everyone. Thank you.